to the sewing tutorial for the Lush Garden Dress. I'm Karola, and in this video I'll guide you through the process of creating this A-line dress with gathered exposed ruffles and inseam pockets. It's an excellent option for beginners as it doesn't require lining or zipper, but includes the essential elements that will help you build foundational sewing skills. So let's bring your Lush Garden Dress to life. And I'm gonna start by listing the materials that you will need to make your dress. Your self fabric, heat transfer fuse, lining for the pockets. I strongly recommend to use a color that matches the color of your main fabric, threads that match the fabric color, and your patterns, which you will find listed below in the description box. The pattern comes in US sizes from 4 to 22. When downloading the patterns, you will have access to two different size files. This will allow you to print in a print shop or printing at home. When printing at home, you need to follow the instructions listed in the handbook. But if you need an extra visual support, I'm linking below a video where I show you how to work with the patterns. Now let's prep our fabric. Start by pre-shrinking your fabric. To do this, steam it, applying enough steam, so this will help you in case that the fabric shrinks. You can work with a fabric that is already pre-shrinked. Then, place your patterns on top of the fabric, following the grind lines and the indications listed on the patterns. Use pins to adjust or fix the patterns to the fabric and to avoid movement. Cut your patterns following the edge of the paper. Seam allowance is already included, and in the handbook you will find the different seam allowance that you will need to use. On the pocket facings, we will need to add fuse to make it a little bit more structure and balance. You can use the heat transfer of your preference depending on the fabric that you selected. For best results, you can trim 1/8 of an inch of seam allowance around all edges of the fusing piece. This will help you with the bulkiness. Then, using your iron, add the heat transfer fusing to the wrong side of the fabric on the pocket facing. On heat transfer fuse, the rough side is the one that contains the glue, so this is the side that must face the wrong side of the fabric. Also remember to transfer all the information listed on the patterns to your fabric, such as darts and notches. Let's start by working on the back darts. This pattern includes 2 diamond darts, allowing you to choose between a more relaxed fit by sewing only one dart or a more fitted fit by incorporating both darts. If you decide to add just one dart, please select the one closer to the center back. Also, you could get rid of both darts and get an even more relaxed fit. I always like to start by transferring my darts to my fabric. To do so, I'm going to be using chalk paper and my tracing wheel. The method that I'm using to transfer my dart is known as the tailoring method, where you transfer the whole dart. But there is another method where you only use the drill holes located on the edges of the dart. So you just need to mark them to transfer your dart to the fabric. If you want to learn more about this technique, please watch the video that I have linked below where I explain you how to transfer and sew darts using the industry method. Once my dart is transferred, I like to find the middle of it. To do so, I measure the widest part of my dart and I divide that in half. Then I connect with a straight line the middle of my dart and my dart tips. And then following that line, I'm gonna fold the fabric right sides together, aligning the dart lines. I'm gonna pin along the dart lines to make sure it doesn't move. Then I'm gonna sew starting at the tip of the dart. I'm not gonna back tack, I'm just gonna run my stitch until I reach the center of the dart or the widest part of the dart. When you get to that point, what you need to do is you need to keep your needle in the fabric, lift your presser foot, pivot your fabric, and continue sewing until you reach to the other tip of the dart. When reaching or getting to the tip of the dart, I will suggest you to running some couple of stitches without fabric underneath, since this technique will allow you to twist the threads. Remember that we are not going to back tack at the tips because it could create bulkiness, so we just need long tail threads to later on make some knots. Finally, press the dart flat, first along the stitching line and then towards the center back. Remember to repeat the same procedure in both pattern pieces. Now search the center backs of the seams independently in both pieces. Now, with right sides facing, align the back pattern pieces and close the center back seam from the marked opening notch downwards using 5/8 of an inch of seam allowance. Then press the seams open and continue pressing all the way to the neckline using the same 5/8 of an inch as a reference for folding the opening. Finally, with the right side of the fabric facing you, top stitch the opening area using 1/2 inch of distance from the edge. Now I'm going to work on my armhole darts, which are located on my front pattern. To do this, I already marked and transferred the dart lines on the fabric in the same way I did it before with my diamond darts. So I'm going to start by finding the center of my dart, and then I'm going to fold the fabric right sides together, aligning the dart legs and following the center of the dart. I will pin along the marked lines to secure the fold, and I will stitch from the widest end of the dart towards the point, tapering off as I reach the tip for a smooth finish. And once I reach the tip of the dart, I will continue sewing for at least 1/2 inch beyond the fabric to secure the threads, in the same way I did with my contour dart. Next, I'm going to press my dart flat, first along the seam, and then I will press it downwards using a tailor hem cushion underneath to keep my bust shape. With right sides facing, I'm going to line my patterns at the shoulder line. I'm going to stitch these seams using 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Then I will clean the seams close using my serger to get a better finish. Then I'm going to press my seams flat, and then I'm going to press them towards the back. It's important to ensure the base garment fits correctly. At this stage, the shoulder seams are sewn, but the side seams are not. Quickly baste by hand, because you must get rid of these seams for the next steps, the side seams, and try on the base garment to check the fit. Since this pattern is designed for standard sizes, adjustments might be necessary to achieve a perfect fit for each specific body, and the best approach is to make those adjustments at this stage. To work in our ruffle top piece, we need to start by serging the side or shorter edges of the piece. We need to do this independently in every single piece. With right sides facing, join the pieces together by adding the shorter pieces to the side of the longest one, and then close the strip completely using 1/4 inch of seam allowance. And now press the seams open to avoid bulkiness. Serge the upper and lower edge of the ruffle and fold the fabric between 1 inch and 1 1/4 down on the upper edge. And with the help of your iron, press it with enough steam to pre-crease it. Now I'm going to sew 2 rows of gathering stitches, the first one 1/2 inch from the folded edge and the second one 5/8 of an inch from the folded edge. As you can see here, I'm using basted thread, which is thicker and stronger, and the reason is that I'm working with a heavier fabric, and since the gathering stitches needs to run through 2 layers of fabric, using these kind of threads and even doing it by hand will make the gathering process faster and more efficient later on. But if you are working with a lightweight fabric, you can use the longest stitch available on your machine and do this procedure using your sewing machine. Pull the thread tails of both stitches until you gather the ruffle to the desired size. Use the marking reference line on the pattern pieces to ensure the ruffle length is gathered correctly. With the right side of the fabric facing you, transfer the reference line marking to the fabric. Then with the right side of the ruffle facing you, start positioning it on top of the reference marking line. And to start pinning the ruffle, you will need to align the shoulder seam allowance first. Align the shoulder seam allowance of the ruffle with the shoulder seam allowance of the dress. Pin it in place and repeat the same procedure in the other side. Now, as we just did before, we are gonna align the back seam of the ruffle with the back seam of our base dress. Then ensure the ruffle is evenly distributed between the seams and align it correctly to the marking reference line. Repeat the same procedure in the front ruffle. Repeat the same procedure at the front of the ruffle and make sure that the gather is evenly distributed in between the shoulder seams and that you are using the marking line as a reference to do so. Once you feel happy with the way the ruffle looks, you can start pinning it to the desired location. In this case, the marking line that we have as a reference. And I'm going to use a good amount of pins to keep it in place. This will be extremely helpful when we are sewing the ruffle. As you can see, I'm adding my pins really close to each other to have more control over the ruffle. But if you don't feel comfortable using a crazy amount of pins, you can also baste by hand the ruffle in place. But it's important to keep it in the right position and avoid movement. And now I'm gonna lock my gathering threads by using a pin, and I'm gonna take both threads and I'm gonna twist it around my pin, making some kind of 8 shape, just as you can see here. And now with the tip of my iron, I'm gonna press the gather area around 1/2 inch from the edge just to keep it in place. This technique is extremely beneficial when you are working with heavier or thicker fabrics because it will help you to reduce a little bit of the bulkiness and it will be easier to sew the gather ruffle on top later on. So here you can see how the ruffle looks nice and beautiful on the right side of the fabric and also on the wrong side of the fabric. I strongly recommend to check underneath to make sure that you don't have any wrinkles and everything is laying in the way it should. And finally sew the ruffle, making a stitch 1/2 inch from the folded edge. I will recommend you to go slowly if you have your pins in, and even if you can help yourself with an awl to just push and feed your fabric through. Now what I'm gonna do is remove my basting stitches, and to do that I'm just gonna use a seam ripper and I'm gonna start ripping my seams through. I'm gonna do this for several reasons, but the mains are that, as you can see here, I'm using contrasting and thicker thread, so I don't want that to be visible, but also since this is an exposed gather, I don't want to see the extra stitches for the gathering to be visible. But of course, this is a matter of personal preference. If your gathering stitches were made by machine and they look neat and they are almost not visible and you want to leave them in, it's your decision. But as I say, I always rather to remove them, especially when it's an exposed gather. Clean the ruffle hem by folding the fabric edge previously serged up by 1/4 inch. You could press the hem with an iron to keep it in place and then just run a consistent stitch along the edge. This is a suggested hemming technique for thick fabrics, but this can be also approached with a baby hem or double turn. And now I'm going to give it a final press to the hem with the tip of my iron to get a more professional finish. Now let's sew our pockets. To do this, we're going to start by turning 1/4 inch up on the edge of the facing piece. and we are going to use our iron to pre-crease it and keep it in place. Repeat this in the other facing since you need 2 of them per pocket. Place the facing on top of one pocket bag. Sew the facing to the pocket bag along the turn up edge and stay stitch the facing side to the pocket bag side to secure the facing in place. Repeat this procedure in the other pocket bag. Remember that you need 2 pocket bags per pocket. With right size facing, pin one pocket bag piece to the front side seam, aligning the top of the pocket with the marked placement, which means the notch that you will find on the body pattern. Pin it in place to secure it. Sew the pocket piece to the side seam in between the notches that you will find on the pocket. Use half an inch of seam allowance. Clip the notches as close as possible to the stitch without cutting it, and understitch the seam allowance to help with the folding. Once you understitch, fold your pocket to the wrong side of the fabric and make sure you align the seam allowance that you have left at the top and at the bottom of the pocket with the seam allowance of your dress. Here you already can see the opening of the pocket. I'm gonna press this area because I don't want to top stitch, so pressing will keep it in place. Then place the second pocket bag on top of the first, right size facing, and pin around the edges of the pocket, matching the notches. Finally, sew around the pocket bag using half an inch of seam allowance, and knit the seams with a serger for a cleaner look. Now I'm going to take the opening of the pocket and I'm going to pin it away from the edge. In this way, we avoid it to be in between the seams when sewing. With right size facing, we're going to align the front and back pieces together. As you can see here, the front side will be part of the pocket and we are just going to align it together. I'm going to pin along the seam to keep it in place, and now I'm going to start sewing from the top of the side seam down using half an inch of seam allowance, and I'm going to serge the seam close for a better finish. Finally, I'm going to press the seam towards the back using enough steam to keep it in place. The last step to finish the pocket will be adding a bar tag. This is a type of secure stitch that is often used on pockets. It's a short, dense zigzag stitch that reinforces that areas of the pocket that have so much stress. This is a kind of a stitch that in the industry is made using a specific machine, and since we are working at home and probably any of us have access to that machine, we are going to imitate that stitch using the zigzag of our domestic sewing machine. To sew your bar tag, you need to first adjust the stitch width to the narrow zigzag available in your machine and the stitch length to a very short length, almost 0, almost 1 depending of your machine. This will help you to create a dense stitch. Then you will place the area you want to bar tag under the presser foot. Typically you will do this bar tag at the ends of the pocket. Then you're gonna start stitching back and forth over the same spot couple of times to get a tight and compact stitch. The length of the bar tag should be around 3/8 of an inch, and this is something that you can mark before just to have an idea of what you are doing and where you are going. Sometimes you could see bar tags that measure half an inch. It will depend of the garment, but since we are working with this inseam pocket, we don't want that to be too bulky, but we want to be protected and to ensure durability in the garment. So we're going to repeat the same procedure in both edges of the pocket in both sides of the garment. Prepare the bias tape to clean armholes by folding the pattern in half lengthwise with wrong size facing. Press it with enough steam to pre-crease it. The pattern for the bias tape is already included. You could use it to make your bias tape on your own fabric, or you could use commercial bias tape as well. Consider that for that portion or for the armhole, the bias tape will not be visible on the right side of the fabric. It will be completely hidden inside. To install the bias tape, I'm going to start by marking 1/2 inch in the tape. Then I'm going to match that 1/2 inch, that mark, with my size seam allowance. And I'm going to make sure that I'm aligning the raw edge of the bias tape with the edge of the armhole, making sure that right sides are facing together. I'm going to leave around 1 inch without attaching the tape to the armhole, as this will make closing the bias tape easier later on. I'm going to start sewing the bias tape to the fabric using 1/4 inch of seam allowance. I'm going to make sure that I'm aligning the raw edges of the tape with the right side of the fabric and the raw edge of the armhole. Continue sewing around until you are 1 inch away from the side seam. Next, take your bias tape and place it in position around the armhole until you reach the side seam. Just where the side seam is, put a pin as a reference on top of the bias tape. And from the position where the pin is, measure and mark 1/2 inch and trim the fabric excess. Then take the garment from the sewing machine and close the bias tape by facing right sides together and joining the edges of the piece. You will sew it and close it using 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Now we need to attach what is left, and to do so I'm going to start by trimming my seam allowance to reduce it around 1/4 inch to avoid bulkiness. Then I'm going to open my seam. You could press it if you want. I'm going to fold my bias tape in the same way it's folded before, and I'm going to line the side seam of my armhole with the side seam of my bias tape. You can pin it in position to keep it in place. Armhole and the bias tape are going to match perfectly because we measured it before. So what we need to do is sew what is left using 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Then I'm going to understitch, which means that I'm going to run a stitch on the side of the bias tape, making sure my previous seam allowance is underneath. Understitching is an important step of adding a hidden bias tape because it will help us to keep the bias secure and in place, and it will prevent it from rolling or shifting to the right side of the fabric, which means that it ensures that the bias tape will be hidden. It will help us with the bulkiness of the seam, and it will give to our garment a more polished and professional finish. Finally, fold the bias tape over to the wrong side of the fabric, ensuring that it covers this previous stitching line. You can press it to keep it in place, and also you could baste it if you want. Then just top a stitch close to the folded edge of the bias tape to secure it to the wrong side of the fabric. Then just give it a final press around the armhole. I always like to do it on top of a curved surface to keep the armhole shape. Now let's prepare the bias tape for the neckline. We prepare them in different steps because this one, on the contrary, will be visible. To create the neckline bias tape, you will need to join the neckline bias tape with the bow straps. To do this, you need to join the edges of the bow straps to the edge of the base bias tape, facing right side together and following the 45-degree angle that they have. You are going to stitch it together, and you are going to follow the same technique that we normally follow when we create bias tape. Then press the seams open and trim any excess fabric. Next, with right side facing, fold the strap in half lengthwise to pre-crease it. Cut the ends of the bias tape following a 90-degree angle. Now open the fold and use it as a reference to fold both edges in half. Then fold it again in half, ensuring that the bottom part is 1/8 of an inch bigger. This technique helps sew the neckline bias tape in place while keeping it exposed in one single step. Find the center of the bias tape by folding the bias tape in half. Mark it with a pin or with a notch. Also find the center front of your dress neckline by folding it in half and matching the shoulder seams together. Mark it with a pin or with a notch. Aligning the center of both pieces, place the bias tape so that it sandwiches the neckline. making sure that the side of the tape that is 1/8 of an inch longer is placed underneath, and align the bias tape along the entire neckline. To prevent movement or errors, I strongly recommend to baste the bias tape in place first. This is an optional step, but you could press it before stitching it. This will be beneficial, especially when you are working with heavier or thicker fabrics, because it will help you to get more control over the bias tape when sewing in the machine. Once it's secure, run a consistent stitch as close as possible to the edge of the bias tape along the neckline, ensuring it's firmly attached. If you're using a domestic sewing machine, you might find easier to do this step using your presser zipper foot. Now let's finish cleaning the remaining part of the bias tape that will be used to close the dress neckline. First, measure the length of the strip, ensuring it's the desired length for tying or closing the neckline, and trim your strip to your preferred length. After trimming, fold the raw edges of the bias tape inwards and press them to create a clean finish. For more control, you could baste the bias tape in place. This will be beneficial, especially when you are working with heavier or thicker fabrics. Finally, top stitch along the folded edge to secure the tape, ensuring it remains neat and tidy. Now let's serge the side edges of the ruffle bottom piece. With right size facing, join the ruffle pieces on the sides using 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Serge the seams close and fold them towards the back. Next, serge the upper and lower edge of the ruffle. Mark with a pin or with notches the center of the dress hemline along with the center of the ruffle piece. Now fold the fabric 1 inch down on the upper edge of the ruffle and press it with the iron to pre-crease it. With the right side up and the fabric unfolded, sew 2 rows of gathering stitches. The first one 1/2 inch from the edge and the second one 1.5 from the edge, using the longest stitch available on your machine or basting by hand, as I'm doing here using basting thread. Pull the thread tails of both stitches until you gather the ruffle to match the dress hemline. Make sure the gathering is evenly distributed along the area. With right size facing, place the bottom ruffle on top of the dress and aligning the side seams, centers, and raw edges of both pieces, pin it in place to keep it secure. Make sure that you evenly distribute the gather along the seams at this step. Sew the ruffle along the hemline using 1/2 inch of seam allowance. Then serge the seams close. When working with gathered pieces, I like to place the gathering area or gathering section facing directly towards the feed dogs of the machine, since this helped me moving the fabric through and also balancing and distributed the gathers as I sew. Flip the ruffle piece down, then fold the edge along the pre-creased folding line. Start pinning the ruffle to the dress beginning at the side seams and carefully align them. As you pin, evenly distribute the gathers to ensure a smooth and balanced appearance. Be careful to not catch extra fabric below from other areas of the dress. Follow the same procedure that we did in the top ruffle, and with the tip of your iron, press the top area of the ruffle to reduce a little bit of the bulkiness. Ensure the ruffle is evenly distributed and align it correctly before sewing. Then sew the ruffle in place, making a stitch 1/2 inch from the folded edge. You may use your previous stitch as a reference. Now, as you can see, since my basting stitches are visible, I'm going to remove them by using my seam ripper and ripping them completely to remove it from the dress. Finally, clean the ruffle hem by folding the fabric edge, previously serged, up by 1/4 inch. Press it with an iron if you want more control, and then run a consistent stitch along the edge. This is a suggested hemming technique for thick fabrics, but the hem allowance can also be approached by making a baby hem or double turn. To finish your garment, give it a good overall press, and that's it. This is the final result.